The F train was rattling somewhere beneath the East River, suspended in that liminal, fluorescent-lit purgatory between Brooklyn and Manhattan. The air was thick with the distinct, stale scent of the New York subway, a mix of ozone and damp concrete. Beside me stood two 20-somethings, their faces bathed in the cool blue glow of an iPhone screen as they scrolled through their feed to kill time during the commute. Suddenly, the woman's thumb stopped. She leaned closer, her expression a mix of casual fascination and detached amusement, as if she just spotted a particularly striking piece of street art. She watched the loop for a second, then turned to her companion and said effortlessly, "I never thought a missile could be so sexy." The young man leaned over, squinted at the screen, and let out a soft, appreciative laugh. I turned my head just enough to catch a glimpse of the device. The video playing was a viral clip of the night sky over Tel Aviv. Streaks of fiery orange were piercing the blackness, ballistic missiles descending in a chaotic, apocalyptic rain of fire, met by the incandescent bursts of defense systems. It was a scene of total, terrifying destruction. But here, in the belly of the New York transit system, it was being consumed as a passing aesthetic thrill. To these two, it wasn't a recording of a geopolitical catastrophe or a moment of human terror. It was a digital artifact. It was content. They weren't looking at the erasure of lives. They were appraising the industrial design of a warhead and the rhythmic choreography of the explosions. That instantaneous shift, applying the vocabulary, desire, and consumerism to a weapon of mass destruction, left me paralyzed. It felt like witnessing the absolute triumph of the algorithm over empathy. As the train slowed and they began chatting idly about where to grab coffee, I realized I was looking at a new kind of cruelty. The cruelty of the untouchable spectator, where the apocalypse is just another high-contrast video to be reviewed like a new sports car. It makes you wonder, how did we get so far away from the world that we can only see its ruins as a vibe?
Yeah, I mean, that scene on the subway, it really isn't just a random anecdote. It is the end result of this massive, completely silent restructuring of human cognition. We are operating under a totally new paradigm right now.
Right.
Empathy is no longer fading naturally just because, we are physically distant from a conflict or because time has passed. It is being systematically dismantled. And the tools doing that dismantling are the very interfaces you use every single day.
So the core mission of this deep dive today is to really tear that apart. We are dissecting a profound shift in human emotional and moral processing. What we need to understand is how the architecture of digital platforms, specifically algorithmic design and short-form video, how it fundamentally rewires our neurobiology. We are watching geopolitical devastation get turned into this curated, consumerist, aesthetic experience, and we need to figure out how that actually happens.
Because the interface itself actively alters the psychological architecture you need to process human suffering. The platform doesn't just show you a video, it reduces that suffering into a frictionless stream of data points.
Just data points.
Right. And those data points are evaluated by your brain purely on the basis of visual stimulation.
I want to look at exactly how this algorithmic choreography of destruction operates in practice. Let's look at someone like Leo, for instance.
Okay.
Think about Leo sitting in his dimly lit Berlin apartment late at night. The only illumination in the room is that sharp blue light of his smartphone screen. It's casting this pale glow over a half-eaten kebab resting on his desk. He is deep into a session of doom scrolling.
That's a very familiar scenario for most people.
Exactly. His thumb is flicking upward across the glass with this rhythmic, almost mechanical precision. It's like a trance. And the algorithm feeding him has already mapped his psychological profile perfectly. It knows he has a preference for high contrast, visually arresting imagery.
It has basically built a working model of his visual cortex. It knows exactly what holds his eye.
Right. So without any warning, the feed pivots seamlessly. One moment, he is watching a slow-motion, highly stylized video of a Japanese tea ceremony.
Beautiful, calming.
Yeah. He's watching the delicate whisking of bright green matcha, that serene bamboo aesthetic. It's totally calming.
Then, the very next swipe, he is looking at a thermal view recording of a drone strike in a dust-choked suburb of Kharkiv.
And the juxtaposition there is so critical, going from a peaceful tea ceremony to a theater of war in a fraction of a second.
It's pure whiplash. But Leo does not pause to consider the human lives being extinguished in those glowing white heat blobs on his screen. He doesn't process the reality of it.
Because the interface doesn't give him the context to do that.
Instead, his designer's eye immediately notes the satisfying way the white phosphorus blooms against the grainy, gray background. To him, in that isolated moment, it just looks like a digital ink wash painting. For a fleeting second, he actually feels this surge of artistic appreciation for the clean geometry of the explosion.
Which shows how the visual processing completely supersedes the moral processing.
Completely. And then his thumb flicks again. The next swipe replaces that charred horizon with a 15-second tutorial on how to style cargo pants.
The transition is so smooth, so entirely devoid of friction, that the horror doesn't even have time to register in his brain as a tragedy. It is merely another visually arresting asset in a never-ending stream of content.
Right, and the only thing Leo is left with when he finally puts the phone down is this hollow, lingering sense of shame that he can't quite name or articulate.
Because he knows something is wrong, but he hasn't actually processed it.
And what you are describing with Leo is the precise mechanical function of social media recommendation systems. We really need to strip away this idea that these algorithms understand the meaning of the content they push. They don't.
They're just reading the code.
Yes. They are completely agnostic to human well-being, to moral weight, or the severity of the violence. They operate on a single, ruthless metric.
Which is engagement, right?
The maximization of engagement and attention. The system did not explicitly ask Leo if he wanted to watch a drone strike. Instead, it inferred his quote-unquote interest from his micro-engagements.
Wait, slow down on that term for a second. Micro-engagements. What does that actually mean when I'm just sitting there holding a phone?
Well, it means the system is tracking the physical interactions between your thumb and the glass screen at a millisecond level. It measures the exact milliseconds your thumb hovers over the screen before swiping.
Oh.
It tracks the slight deceleration of your scroll when a specific image enters the frame. It logs the decision to let a video replay for even 1 extra second.
So if I pause on a video of a building collapsing, just out of pure shock, the algorithm reads that shock as a request for more collapsing buildings.
Exactly. Decades of media psychology research have proven that threatening, shocking, and morally provocative material captures human attention far more reliably than neutral content.
Right, because our brains are hardwired to pay attention to danger.
Exactly. The algorithm exploits that biological vulnerability. It detects that hesitation, that single millisecond of shock, and interprets it as engagement. It then amplifies that exact type of content, gradually shifting the user's feed from benign, everyday stuff to high arousal material, and eventually into graphic, extreme violence.
It sounds exactly like a rigged casino slot machine. But instead of dispensing coins, it's dispensing high-contrast trauma.
That slot machine analogy is actually fundamental to understanding this behavior. It exploits what neuroscientists call the wanting without liking dopamine lag.
Okay, unpack wanting without liking. Because if I don't like it, why would I want it?
Because the brain's reward circuitry can actually be completely decoupled from actual pleasure. When you pull the lever on a slot machine or, when you swipe up on your screen, you are hit with a rapid, unpredictable sequence of rewards and shocks.
You never know what's coming next.
Right. You don't know what the next video will be. It could be cargo pants, or it could be a drone strike. This unpredictability activates the dopamine system, which drives a compulsive craving to keep pulling the lever. You crave the resolution of the unknown.
So Leo didn't actually want to watch people die. The intermittent reinforcement of the feed just kept his thumb moving.
Yes. The craving to swipe persists entirely independently of any actual pleasure or genuine intellectual interest in the war.
And that mechanism is why the escalation loop is so incredibly dangerous. The algorithms actively detect psychological vulnerability and relentlessly push you toward the borderlines of acceptable content.
This is a documented mechanical reality.
How do we know that for sure, though? I mean, how do we know it's not just users actively seeking this dark stuff out?
Because independent audits of platform pathways have consistently demonstrated this. Researchers created simulated accounts that mimic the browsing behavior of vulnerable teenage profiles on platforms like TikTok and YouTube. The algorithms took over almost immediately. Within days, not months, but days, these test accounts saw massive exponential increases in extreme borderline content. Engagement signals from watch time and micro-hesitations were fed back into the machine,
which then aggressively amplified problematic material to keep the user trapped in that high arousal state.
Exactly. It keeps them locked in the zone. And it's crucial to draw a sharp distinction here between intentional news consumption and algorithmic exposure.
Right, because they're totally different experiences.
Completely. When you sit down to read a newspaper, or when you actively search for a broadcast about a conflict, you are engaging in a deliberate cognitive act. You are mentally preparing yourself to process information about the world. You have your defenses up, your context is in place.
But when I'm just scrolling while waiting for the bus, My defenses are totally down. I'm just looking for entertainment. I'm looking to kill time.
And in that vulnerable state, 70% of teenagers encounter real-world violence online without ever searching for it.
70%.
And a quarter of those explicitly report that the content was forced onto their screens by the algorithm. The digital space is no longer a library of information where you pull a book off a shelf. It is a zone of passive ambush.
Passive ambush.
You are subjected to catastrophic violence entirely against your will, sandwiched directly between a joke and a dance trend.
But that passive ambush doesn't just shock you in the moment, though. It actually fundamentally alters the physical structure of the brain. Sarah.
Right, Sarah's case is a perfect example.
Think about a teenager named Sarah in a quiet, incredibly safe suburb of London. She is lying on her bed in the dark, watching a looped video of a missile interception over a darkened Middle Eastern skyline. Her screen is just flickering with the staccato rhythm of the Iron Dome defense system.
Which is a system designed to intercept lethal projectiles, real weapons.
Right, but the video she is watching has been edited. It's overlaid with this lo-fi hip-hop soundtrack. It's a curated vibe that completely strips the screeching, terrifying reality of the air raid sirens away. She watches the loop 4, 5, 6 times in a row, totally mesmerized by the kinetic, glowing arcs of the interceptors lighting up the night sky.
It's pure visual spectacle to her.
And the platform's interface has cropped the video incredibly tightly. The actual physical space where real families are huddled in concrete basements, bracing for impact, is entirely invisible. It is literally cut out of the frame.
So the context is visually deleted.
Exactly. Sarah feels a profound sense of engagement with the video, but absolutely zero empathy. The conflict has been gamified for her. It has been turned into a visually satisfying loop that triggers the exact same dopamine response she might get from watching a video of someone power washing a driveway.
It's just visual ASMR.
Yeah. And when her mother calls her downstairs for dinner, the spell breaks, and Sarah realizes she has been staring at a mechanism of mass death for 20 minutes. And yet her heart rate hasn't climbed a single beat. Her physiological baseline hasn't shifted at all.
She is experiencing zero physiological arousal to a life or death scenario.
The detachment is so absolute, so complete, that the war feels to her like a distant, high-budget science fiction production. The real-world consequences feel as fictional as the comment section beneath the post.
And Sarah's lack of an elevated heart rate is a perfect, truly terrifying illustration of the neurobiology of numbing. When you are repeatedly exposed to violent media, your brain undergoes measurable physiological adaptations.
What is physically changing in Sarah's brain while she watches that loop?
Well, it starts with the amygdala. The amygdala is basically the brain's threat detection center. It is responsible for processing fear and triggering emotional reaction.
Right.
When you are constantly bombarded with high arousal, violent imagery, the amygdala literally becomes less reactive. It downregulates its response.
It turns the volume down on the alarm.
It has to avoid burning out. And simultaneously, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis becomes dampened.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, think of that like the body's emergency command center, right? It's the system that dumps adrenaline and cortisol into your blood when a tiger jumps out of the bushes.
Exactly.
Are you saying the algorithm is literally cutting the wires to that system?
Yes. It regulates your body's physiological stress response. Initial exposure to a traumatic image might cause a huge spike in cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Your heart races, your palms sweat.
Which is what should happen when you see a war.
Exactly. But with repeated algorithmic bombardment, that physiological stress response is blunted. You stop producing the cortisol. Your nervous system stops sounding the alarm. This isn't just someone becoming cynical. This is desensitization at the deepest neuroendocrine level.
But it goes beyond just numbing the fear response, doesn't it? It actually shuts down the parts of the brain required to recognize the humanity in the video, the parts that make you realize there are actual people in those basements.
Right, it shuts down the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN, what does that do when we aren't scrolling on our phones?
The DMN is a complex neural circuitry that activates when your mind is at rest. If you were staring out the window on a train, letting your mind wander, your DMN is highly active. It is fundamentally responsible for mentalizing.
Mentalizing meaning putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Exactly. The capacity to understand the mental states, the intentions, and the emotional experiences of others. It is the biological engine of empathy and reflection.
So what happens when we're scrolling?
When you are engaged in rapid, continuous scrolling, processing a barrage of disconnected, high-arousal stimuli, a tea ceremony, a drone strike, cargo pants, your DMN simply cannot maintain functional connectivity.
Because it never gets a moment of rest to actually process what it just saw.
It remains inactive. And because the DMN is offline, the emotional signal that is normally inextricably tied to moral judgment goes completely muted.
That is wild.
You might intellectually, abstractly know that watching a neighborhood be leveled by artillery is wrong. You know it is a bad thing, but you no longer feel that it is wrong. The cognitive evaluation is completely divorced from the emotional weight.
And when that happens on a mass scale, across millions of users, we hit what sociologists call the singularity effect.
Which leads directly to a state of narcotizing dysfunction.
Let's translate those terms for a second. The singularity effect. That's the strange math of human compassion, right? It suggests that human empathy does not scale.
No, it doesn't.
We can care deeply, profoundly about a single identifiable victim. A child stuck in a well captures the attention of the whole world. But as the magnitude of the stimulus increases, as the casualty numbers rise into the thousands, and the footage is broadcast directly into our hands every single hour, our emotional response actually weakens.
The larger the tragedy, the less we feel.
Right. And widespread, excessive exposure to human suffering does not mobilize society to take action. You would think seeing more war would make people march in the streets to stop it.
It doesn't.
Instead, it induces this narcotizing dysfunction.
Yeah.
People get drunk on the information to the point where they are paralyzed. The sheer volume of the tragedies forces them to pale into background noise. They just become ambient static in our daily lives.
It's a complete overload.
I want to push back on the premise here for a moment.
Sure.
Is it possible that this profound detachment, this phenomenon, where the gorilla glass of the smartphone acts as an impenetrable emotional shield, is actually a necessary evolutionary defense mechanism? Well, think about the sheer volume of global trauma that is accessible in the single scrolling session. If I genuinely, deeply internalize the reality of every catastrophic video on my feed, if I felt the full emotional weight of every drone strike, every ruined hospital, every grieving parent crying over rubble, wouldn't my nervous system simply collapse under the processing load? I mean, human beings weren't built to witness the suffering of the entire planet all at once. Perhaps this apathy isn't a glitch in our brains. Perhaps it is the only armor that allows a human being to survive the modern internet without descending into total psychological paralysis.
You are identifying a crucial survival mechanism there. Right, the human nervous system evolved to process localized threats within a small community. You evolved to care about the 30 people in your tribe, not to bear the psychic weight of continuous global catastrophes occurring simultaneously on 5 different continents.
It's just too much data.
The emotional blunting you described is indeed a protective shielding against systemic collapse. If you felt it all, you wouldn't be able to function.
So the numbing is actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's saving us from burning out.
However, the danger arises when this evolutionary defense mechanism is hijacked and manipulated by an interface designed for profit rather than protection.
Oh, yeah.
The algorithm does not shield you to preserve your mental health. It numbs you so that you can continue consuming. It forces you into the numbness so you'll watch another ad. And in doing so, it alters the very language we use to conceptualize violence, effectively rewriting our moral vocabulary.
Which brings us to the terrifying way we now actually talk about these events. Because we don't just consume the videos in silence, we discuss them. And the language has fundamentally changed.
Yes.
Let's look at Marcus. Marcus is a tech enthusiast. He's a guy who spends his nights on military-focused Discord servers. He is deeply embedded in these online communities that analyze global conflicts. One evening, he is typing out a critique of a new tactical drone deployment in a contested border zone.
And you really have to listen to the specific words he uses.
Exactly. He doesn't use terms like casualty rates, or humanitarian crisis, or civilian toll. Instead, he evaluates the weapon by praising the sexy silhouette of the airframe.
Sexy silhouette.
Yeah. He compliments the minimalist aesthetic of the cockpit's user interface. To Marcus and the peers in his server, the machinery of mass death has undergone a complete linguistic rebranding. It is categorized and discussed with the exact same consumerist fervor as an unboxing video for a new smartphone.
He's literally reviewing a weapon like it's a new piece of consumer tech.
He describes a saturation bombing run as having incredible production value. He argues that the user experience of the digital targeting system is leagues ahead of the competition. The vulnerability of the human beings on the receiving end of that targeting system is a data point he has learned to filter out entirely. It simply doesn't exist in his framework.
Until the illusion is forcefully broken.
Right. The illusion only shatters for him when, in a piece of high-fidelity strike footage, a stray frame catches a child's discarded shoe in the rubble. It is just a split second, but it is too jagged, it's too undeniably human.
It breaks the aesthetic.
His consumerist jargon suddenly fails him in that moment. For a brief second, the sleekness of the technology feels like a lie. It feels like a thin veneer of consumerist polish stretched over a reality his vocabulary is completely ill-equipped to handle.
Marcus's behavior demonstrates the linguistic flattening that occurs when the vocabulary of late-stage capitalism and the shopping mall successfully colonizes the theater of war.
Linguistic flattening, the idea that all language gets dragged down to the same superficial level.
Exactly. When violence is consumed through the exact same digital interface used to review clothing hauls or critique electronics or swipe on a dating app, the brain defaults to the evaluative metrics associated with those harmless activities.
It's a context collapse.
The tragedy is evaluated by its visual appeal, its clean lines, its industrial design. The language of consumerism strips away all moral context.
Because if you are using an app designed for shopping, you're going to think like a shopper, even if you're looking at a war.
It is an erasure of the human element, and it is driven by what we call moral contagion. In online networks, emotional, highly polarized language spreads rapidly, but it does so by shedding nuance and humanitarian context.
So the platform is actively encouraging this kind of talk.
The algorithm pairs violent clips with comment sections filled with detached aesthetic critiques or rigid hostility. The viewer is socially reinforced by the comments to interpret the footage not as a human catastrophe, but as a product to be reviewed.
That is the core absurdity of our digital age. Because we simply lack the linguistic bandwidth to process catastrophic violence on this scale, we default to Yelp-style reviews. We appraise a weapon of mass destruction as if it were a new sports car sitting on a showroom floor. We are evaluating the production value of actual human annihilation.
And I need to stress that this aestheticization of violence is not just an organic byproduct of consumer culture. It isn't just an accident. It is actively weaponized.
Wait, weaponized by who?
State actors and military entities explicitly exploit this dynamic in what is termed digital warfare or hybrid warfare.
So they know the algorithms make us process war this way, and they are leaning into it.
Modern conflicts are no longer fought solely with kinetic weapons on physical battlefields. They are fought in the cognitive domain. Computational propaganda, predictive algorithms, and non-human bot networks merge to actively manipulate public opinion.
They're trying to control how we feel.
They do not want you to feel empathy. Empathy is messy and unpredictable. They want you to feel awe or anger or nationalistic pride based on curated, highly stylized footage. They are constructing a specific reality for you to inhabit.
This relies entirely on what the political commentator Walter Lippmann called the mimetic environment.
Yes. Lippmann theorized that the real environment, the actual physical world with all its complex geopolitics and human suffering, is altogether too big, too complex, and too fleeting for direct acquaintance. We can't hold all that reality in our heads.
So we build a model.
Therefore, we construct a pseudo-environment, a mimetic environment. Algorithms do not reflect the real, objective world. They create a highly tailored pseudo-environment.
So we're reacting to the simulation.
People react to the images and narratives presented within this virtual space, and those virtual reactions eventually shape very real-world actions, policies, and geopolitical support.
If you can control the pseudo-environment, you can control the real-world outcome.
In the context of digital warfare, propagandists leverage the algorithm to build a viable pseudo-environment that dictates exactly how a population should perceive a conflict.
And the most fascinating part is how drastically these pseudo-environments change depending on the specific platform and its underlying cultural algorithm. Take the mediation of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. If you look at Weibo, the Chinese platform, the algorithm cultivates a very specific mimetic environment.
It builds a world aligned with specific state and cultural priorities.
The discourse pushed to the top of the feed is characterized by a communitarian perspective. The viral narratives emphasize nationalism, the safety and evacuation of Chinese students abroad, and a Confucian ideology that heavily prioritizes peace and diplomatic harmony over conflict.
That's what the algorithm favors there.
At the same time, The feed presents a complex geopolitical game, framing the narrative to criticize the United States and NATO's involvement. That is the pseudo-environment constructed for that audience. That is the reality they inhabit when they open the app.
Now contrast that with the West.
And contrast that with Twitter or X. The pseudo-environment there is entirely different. The algorithm prioritizes ethnically charged narratives, distinguishing this conflict from others based on geography and identity. It elevates anthropomorphic, deeply personalized stories of civilian survival.
It focuses on the individual rather than the collective.
It shows you the human face of the tragedy, highlighting the individual rather than the community. And simultaneously, it amplifies calls for peace that are rooted not in diplomatic harmony, but in the direct condemnation and sanctioning of Russia.
The exact same physical war, filtered through two completely different algorithmic prisms, creating two totally distinct emotional realities for the users.
It makes you realize that our empathy isn't just dying organically, it is being actively managed. It is culturally directed and heavily curated by the specific platform's pseudo-environment.
You're right on target.
The empathy you feel or the detachment you experience is explicitly engineered by the architecture of the app you happen to be using.
And the clinical fallout from this engineered reality is becoming alarmingly prevalent in psychiatric practice. The symptoms are moving from the digital realm into the physical world. This isn't just a philosophical debate anymore, it's a public health crisis.
What does that actually look like in a clinical setting? How does a psychiatrist see this algorithmic numbing manifesting in a real patient?
Well, consider the case of a middle-aged Army veteran who works as an armed security guard. He has pre-existing diagnoses of post-traumatic stress disorder from his combat deployments, major depressive disorder, and polysubstance use.
So he's already vulnerable.
He is a vulnerable individual, but he is functioning. He initially logged onto social media for entirely benign reasons. He just wanted to watch music videos and look up guitar lessons.
Harmless, everyday internet use.
But the algorithm quickly identified his demographic and behavioral markers. Over time, his feed shifted. It became entirely dominated by progressively violent, high-arousal clips, police body cam footage, security altercations, and brutal street fights.
Even though he didn't search for them.
Right. He actively avoids actual combat footage because he knows it triggers his PTSD, he knows his limits, but he found himself utterly unable to stop watching the street violence. He was compulsively scrolling through it for hours.
So what did that do to him?
Across his clinical visits, psychiatrists noted a profound, disturbing shift in his demeanor. His emotional reactions flattened completely. When he discussed the people in these videos, or even people in the news, his language became incredibly harsh and dehumanizing.
He literally started sounding like the comment section.
He developed severe, escalating irritability. He started experiencing frequent outbursts of anger while driving and became intensely confrontational with people at his workplace.
He started looking for guitar lessons, and the platform rewired his behavior until he was living in a constant state of aggressive hypervigilance. It broke his emotional regulation.
Psychiatrists are increasingly treating algorithmic overexposure with the exact same clinical frameworks used for behavioral addictions. It is treated as a compulsion. The clinical assessment must now directly screen for digital consumption habits, especially when a patient presents with sudden shifts toward rigid punitive thinking or a sudden drop in empathic language.
So how do you treat a patient whose brain has been rewired by a feed? You can't just tell them to turn the phone off, right?
Treatment involves implementing defined viewing windows, stopping the endless, intermittent scrolling throughout the day. Clinicians actively work with patients to intentionally engage with neutral or pro-social content to force the recommendation system to recalibrate.
You have to hack your own algorithm.
You have to actively retrain the algorithm so it stops poisoning the patient. It requires intensive psychoeducation to help the patient understand that the feed is not a reflection of their true desires, but an external system manipulating their reward circuits.
But dealing with this continuous influx of global trauma forces us to confront a really difficult concept. We naturally assume that the antidote to all of this algorithmic apathy is more empathy. The knee-jerk reaction is that we just need to care more. We need to force ourselves to feel the pain of the world.
And that assumption is heavily contested by researchers like psychologist Paul Bloom, who wrote a book literally called Against Empathy. The argument is that empathy, specifically the emotional contagion of feeling exactly what another person is feeling, is a terrible guide for moral decision-making.
Wait, empathy is a bad guide. That goes against everything we are taught.
Empathy acts like a spotlight. It is narrow, it's biased, and it's easily manipulated by a compelling narrative or a striking visual. You feel immense empathy for the person right in front of you, or the person who looks like you, but it leaves everyone else in the dark. When people are overstimulated by 24-hour news alarms demanding that they emotionally resonate with every global tragedy, they experience profound compassion fatigue. Excessive tension and relentless emotional demands make people overly fatigued, leading to burnout and ultimately complete withdrawal.
That backfires.
Relying on raw compassion to process the scale of modern digital warfare is fundamentally unsustainable.
To process modern war properly, we might actually need to selectively lower our raw compassion. Instead of demanding that our exhausted, manipulated empathy do all the heavy lifting, we must rely heavily on cold, systematic, rational thinking to evaluate global events.
We have to step back from the emotion.
We have to intellectually determine what is right and wrong without relying on the algorithmically engineered feeling in our chest. Because the algorithm knows exactly how to hijack that feeling. If we look at the ultimate consequence of all this, we are looking at the absolute triumph of the algorithm over human empathy. The desensitization to high arousal violent content is no longer a metaphor. It is a measurable neurobiological and linguistic phenomenon that is actively reshaping our species.
We are being fundamentally changed by the tools we've built.
In the digital age, the ultimate victory in global conflict may no longer belong to the side with the greatest military might, but to the side whose destruction can be most seamlessly packaged, edited, and consumed as a beautiful, frictionless aesthetic thrill by an audience entirely insulated from the blast radius.